The Damien Trainor, Andy Howson quadrilogy. In 2005, Damien Trainor was ranked number 1 in his division. He was challenged by the number 2 ranked fighter Andy Howson. After this fight they fought again in 2006, also in 2009, and the fourth fight was in 2012. In this video, Combat Council breaks down each fight. In the early stages of the first fight, both fighters are feeling out each other's styles, patterns and movements. This fight comes down to a battle of balance, which ultimately lies in the fighters' stances. Damien uses a mixture of two different looking stances. The first stance is an evenly weight-based stance, sharing his body weight on both legs. With this stance he is able to sit down on his punches and let off some short combinations. The second stance he uses is a sit-back stance with a tapping lead foot. The majority of his weight is on his back leg, and this leaves his lead leg to bounce, block and throw lead push kicks and roundhouse kicks. Damien mixes between the two stances and has success in the early rounds. Andy generally stays in a flat-footed stance with his weight evenly distributed between both feet. With this stance he slowly applies pressure. Throughout the rounds Andy gradually increases the pressure when he starts to see openings, or when he feels the opponent is starting to draw back or give ground. Using this calculated pressure, it psychologically sets a new pace for the fight over the rounds. A pattern emerges with Damien using the second stance when he is being forced back. He shifts his weight to his back leg with little or no weight on the front leg, trying to use it as a defense. This choice or habit is actually to his detriment. Having so much weight on the back foot leaves him unstable and Andy's attacks knock him off balance and stumbling back. This is becoming a regular occurrence, and Damien finds himself off balance a lot, and at times, ending square up on the ropes. The knockdown and finish of the fight is built from Andy's progressive pressure, and Damien's go to defensive leaning on his back leg. Andy pushes Damien back with attacks. Damien becomes flustered trying to find the default stance to defend the onslaught. He uses a long guard and cross block to defend the first lot of punches, then Andy throws the right kick. Damien sees the kick and drops his arm to catch it, but it leaves him open for the follow-up cross which knocks him down. A third-round knockout win for Andy. Going into the second fight, there is a very crucial change made by Damien that gets him the win. We'll break down this as we go along. Starting with Andy, we see very similar tactics that he used in the first encounter. Andy once again slowly presses forward with subtle pressure, trying to close the space and land his attacks. Damien once again uses the two main stances like the first fight, but this time he heavily relies on the first stance with his weight evenly spread between both feet. He occasionally goes into the second stance and uses it more effectively than in the first fight. There's a few moments when Damien uses that stance and he is caught off balance, but his awareness of this helps him recover back to a safer position. The main adjustment that Damien makes is to use the evenly balanced stance to be able to control the distance. Damien maintains a safe space between them. Andy steps forward into the space between them to get closer. Damien moves back creating more space, which then goads Andy into stepping forward again to close the range. When Andy steps in, Damien quickly moves into attack. This becomes a continual occurrence over the 5 rounds. Using this stance in the range, he is able to use small leaps into range and land punches and kicks to Andy. He's also able to move away from dangerous moments more quickly and sustain his balance. He is now more sturdy and can stand his ground to defend or attack with a strong base. These adaptations help steer the result to go in Damien's favor for a majority decision win. The third bout, we see very different tactics from each fighter. Round 1 begins and Andy is static in the center of the ring. He applies little to no pressure. Damien adopts the second stance mentioned before. He sits back on the rear leg with a light lead foot and is mostly static in position. It seems that Andy is happy for Damien to be the aggressor in this round, and mostly works on counters to Damien's attacks. In round 2 they both meet in the center again. Andy begins applying his slow pressure. Damien feels the pressure and starts to pull back like he did in the second fight. But this time, Andy has a response for this action. When Damien creates space by moving back, Andy steps his rear leg forward into the gap. Doing this makes his left leg further back and loaded for a powerful kick. This is a clever tactic to close range quickly. Damien occasionally has success when he moves back into evenly balanced stance. But this is also being challenged when Andy starts to fire back at the same moments. When the third round begins, Andy instantly applies heavy pressure. This is a shock to Damien as he was used to the slower pressure in rounds 1 and 2. Damien is now fully committed to the second stance with his weight predominantly on his back foot. He's trying to use his lead leg to push Andy back, and trying to score with the left lead roundhouse kicks. Andy is still having success with the step to land his left kick. Round 4 Andy forces Damien back with his pressure. His left kick is landing and scoring well. He begins punching before the stepping left kick. With Damien's weight on the back leg, the punches are knocking him off balance, and he's unable to block the kick. Here Andy uses the step to fake the kick. Damien blocks, and Andy changes the attack into an uppercut. When that lands it knocks Damien off balance, and Andy once again lands his kick. With these types of attacks Damien is slowly being broken down. He's unsure of where the attacks are coming from and can't control his own positions. Damien having all his weight on the back foot, is another reason Andy's left kick is landing so frequently. He isn't able to shift his weight to block the kick in time. This is a big factor for him losing the rounds. In the final round, Andy goes to work with his left kick. Damien is trying to figure out ways to defend against the left kicks, and pulls off a few counters. Sensing that Damien is having a last round push, Andy steps up his pressure and intensity. These intelligent modifications in Andy's style get him his #1 ranking back. A unanimous points victory for Andy makes it 2-1 for him in the trilogy. By the fourth fight, both fighters are coming closer to the finish of their careers. Dean James had been sitting comfortably at the #1 position for some time. Andy was ranked #2 and Damien was ranked 3rd. The fight followed the same format as the previous one. The first 2 rounds consisted of even exchanges in the center of the ring. In the third round, Andy stepped up the pressure to push Damien back just like the third fight. Once again the left kick became the winning factor. Damien couldn't seem to block in time or answer back. Andy wins by unanimous decision. This quadrilogy is one of the UK's best remembered rivalries.